Hello and welcome. In 2022, Paul Goldschmidt won the National League MVP, which is the 21st time a St. Louis Cardinal has won the award, second most all time behind the Yankees with 23. And what we're going to attempt to do in this video is rank all 21 Cardinals MVP seasons from worst to first as objectively as possible. Let's go. First, let's take a look at the 21 MVP seasons from the great Rogers Hornsby in 1925 all the way to Paul Goldschmidt in 2022. You'll quickly see that Stan Musial and Albert Pujols are the only players to win multiple MVPs in a Cardinal uniform, each of them winning the award 3 times. Of the 21 MVP winners, 3 were pitchers, and since it's obviously impossible to compare a hitter to a pitcher, we're going to rank the 3 pitching seasons separately from the 18 hitting seasons. Let's also take a quick look at these seasons broken down by position. You'll quickly notice that first basemen have won the award the most times for the Cardinals, winning it 8 times. You'll also see there are a few positions where only 1 time a St. Louis Cardinal has won the award. And it was really tricky pinning down Stan Musial's seasons, as he usually played 2 or 3 different positions every year. So for each of his seasons, I just took whichever position he played the most games at. So how do we determine the rankings? It's fairly simple. We've taken 10 major statistical categories, we rank the players against each other in each category, and we give them points based on their ranking. So, for example, the player with the most runs scored out of all 18 position players receives an 18, and the player with the least runs scored receives a 1. We then total up the points from all 10 categories, and that's how we determine the true MVP among MVPs. So let's jump right in, starting with the pitchers. And the 10 categories we use to rank the 3 pitchers are complete games, shutouts, strikeouts per 9 innings, opponent's batting average, opponent's OPS, win-loss percentage, ERA, WHIP, FIP, and WAR. And in case you're not familiar with WHIP and FIP, WHIP is very simple. It's just walks plus hits per innings pitched. So it's basically just how many people are you letting on base. And FIP is fielding independent pitching, which basically it isolates strikeouts, walks, and home runs. So it's just a measurement of how effective is the pitcher when you take the defense out of the equation and they're not relying on their defense. So coming in at number 3 in our rankings is Dizzy Dean in 1934. Dean obviously had a fantastic season, putting up a 2.66 ERA in a whopping 311 innings. That's right, 311 innings. And among the 3, Dean ranks first in wins with an astonishing 30 wins. And he also ranks first in MVP vote share among the 3 with 98% of the possible votes that year. So apparently winning 30 games won the hearts of almost all the voters in 1934. And our number 2 pitching season is Mort Cooper in 1942. Cooper led the National League in wins, ERA, WHIP, shutouts, and WAR. And in my opinion, it's really a shame that Cooper's season has sort of been lost throughout the years, overshadowed a little bit by other Cardinals greats. Because if it wasn't for this next guy on the list, Cooper's 1.78 ERA in 1942 might have gone down as the greatest pitching season ever for a Cardinal. Which leads us to the best MVP season from a Cardinals pitcher. It's Bob Gibson in 1968. And it's really not even that close. He received 28 of the possible 30 points in our rankings. Gibson's 68 season is obviously well documented at this point. It's been argued by many that this was perhaps the most dominant season of any pitcher ever, not just for the Cardinals. Gibson threw 28 complete games with 13 shutouts. And so to put that number into perspective a little bit, the active leader in career shutouts is Clayton Kershaw with 15 career shutouts. Gibby threw 13 shutouts in 1968 alone. And his microscopic 1.12 ERA still stands as the single season record in the live ball era. So to put it simply, Gibson's 68 season made him not only an MVP, but a legend. So obviously 3 insanely good seasons from all 3 guys here. And, even though Dizzy Dean didn't lead the league in ERA or WHIP like the other 2, he did lead the league in WAR. So even modern analytics would show that all 3 of these guys were deserving of the MVP. And overall, I'm pretty comfortable with how these rankings shook out. As you can see, from Dean to Cooper to Gibson, the numbers do rank in that order in most major statistical categories like shutouts, batting average, OPS, ERA, WHIP, and FIP. So I think it's a pretty fair ranking here. But now we get to the tough part, which is attempting to rank the 18 Cardinals position players who brought home the hardware. The 10 categories we use to rank our position players are runs scored, home runs, RBIs, stolen bases, walks, extra base hits, batting average, OPS plus, WAR, and defensive WAR. And with 18 players, the highest possible score in our rankings is a 180. And just a little side note, I chose OPS Plus over OPS just because OPS Plus adjusts for ballpark factors, and it also compares that number to your peers playing in your season and in your era. So I thought since we're comparing players from different eras, it probably gives us a little bit better of a glimpse of how dominant each season was for their particular era. So coming in at number 18 is Marty Marion in 1944. And, when you just take a glance at Marion's numbers, your first response is, how in the world did this guy win the MVP? He only scored 50 runs, only drove in 63 runs, and put up a pretty pedestrian 686 OPS. And the league average OPS in 1944 was 684. So he was the very definition of an average player at the plate. But keep in mind, he played shortstop, and he was apparently a very slick defender. He led the National League in fielding percentage 4 times throughout his career, and he led in defensive WAR 3 times. And this defensive WAR number also ranks first on our list of 18 hitters. So even though his numbers at the plate were not exactly impressive, he was one of the best defenders in baseball, and the Cardinals won the pennant in 1944. So it seemed to be one of those best players on the best team kind of votes, which is going to be a recurring theme, especially here at the beginning of this list. And a good side note about this season is that Marion's teammate, Stan Musial, did lead the league with a 990 OPS and 51 doubles in 1944. At number 17, we have catcher Bob O'Farrell in 1926. While O'Farrell's offensive numbers are at least better than Marion's, they're still pretty weak for an MVP winner as well. But similar to Marion, O'Farrell was considered an excellent defensive catcher his entire career, and again, the Cardinals won the pennant in 1926. And unlike Marion, O'Farrell did receive 99% of the MVP vote share, so the voters were clearly seeing something they liked here. And a great bonus fact about O'Farrell's 1926 season, you may recall hearing the story of how Babe Ruth was thrown out attempting to steal second base in Game 7 of the World Series in the bottom of the 9th with 2 outs. Yes, that's right. The great Bambino was gunned down at second to end the World Series in 1926. And who was the catcher that threw him out? It was the reigning Cardinals MVP, Bob O'Farrell. And number 16, we have Frankie Frisch in 1931. Frisch's 101 OPS plus means he was essentially a league average hitter in 1931. And while his 3.7 WAR is a nice number that most players would be proud of on any given year, it certainly doesn't scream MVP. The second baseman did, however, hit 311, which the voters obviously really valued back then, and he had a few counting stats that put him ahead of Marion and O'Farrell in our rankings, such as his 96 runs scored and his league-leading 28 stolen bases. Frisch winning the award in 31 as particularly peculiar, I think, due to the fact that his batting average and his OPS were actually well below his own career averages. In fact, Frisch posted 11 seasons with a higher OPS plus than his 1931 season. So this wasn't even close to a good year by Frisch's own standards. But once again, this is another case of best player on the pennant-winning team voting, since the Cardinals did win the pennant in 31. And by then, Frisch had long established himself as a great player, finishing second in MVP voting in 1927 and third in 1924. Coming in at number 15, we have third baseman Ken Boyer in 1964. So finally we get to the point on the list where the numbers actually seem to merit an MVP award. Ken Boyer posted an 854 OPS, scored 100 runs, and led the league with 119 RBIs. It's hard to argue against anyone who leads the league in RBIs, since driving in runs is pretty much the main goal of the game. And for what it's worth, Boyer was also a 5-time Gold Glove winner, so we do know that his stellar defense also played a role in the voting. And a little side note about Ken Boyer here, you look at his career, 62.8 WAR, that's a borderline Hall of Famer here, so, Ken Boyer obviously had a great career. At number 14, we have first baseman Orlando Cepeda in 1967. Cepeda is one of only 2 people on this list to receive 100% of the first place votes, so evidently it was a no-brainer to vote for Cepeda in 67. And you can see that his 325 average, 923 OPS, and league-leading 111 RBIs are all in that MVP range, though his 6.8 WAR ranks only 12th out of our 18 hitters. Number 13, we have third baseman Joe Torre in 1971. And it's funny because Torre is so well known for his managing career at this point that many people forget he actually won an MVP. And it's clear why Torre brought home the hardware that year. As you can see, he led the league in the traditional stats, batting average, and RBIs. And it's also worth noting that his 137 RBIs are the third most among our 18 candidates. However, Torre's negative 2.4 defensive WAR is by far the worst on this list, which really hurt him in our rankings. Coming in at number 12, we have St. Louis fan favorite Willie McGee in 1985. And all those who saw McGee play remember that speed was a big part of his game, as evidenced by his 56 stolen bases in 85, which is easily the most among our 18 candidates. McGee did win the Gold Glove in center field in 85, and he also scored 114 runs and won the batting title with a .353 average. At number 11, we have the most recent Cardinal MVP, Paul Goldschmidt. He's also the oldest Cardinal MVP at age 34. Goldie finally broke through for his first MVP award after 2 second-place finishes and a third-place finish earlier in his career. Goldschmidt led the league in slugging percentage, OPS, and OPS+. And although his teammate Nolan Arenado narrowly edged him out in the WAR category, Goldschmidt was leading the league in OPS pretty much all season, and he was really challenging for a triple crown up until he cooled off in September. And his overall impressive numbers across the board were good enough for him to win the award very comfortably with a 90% vote share. And a side note, the next couple years in Goldschmidt's career I think are going to be really crucial for his Hall of Fame case. He might already be a Hall of Famer as in the minds of a lot of the voters. He's currently sitting at 58.5 WAR for his career, and the average Hall of Fame first baseman has about 65 WAR. So, if he can put up a couple more good seasons, or maybe even just one more really high MVP caliber season, I think he's going to make it into Cooperstown. And speaking of the Hall of Fame, it's a crying shame that number 10 on our list is not in the Hall of Fame. It's first baseman Keith Hernandez. Hernandez is arguably the greatest defensive first baseman in history, winning 11 Gold Gloves. So, if being the greatest defender at your position isn't Hall of Fame worthy, I'm not sure what is. But his bat was a force to be reckoned with as well. And in '79, he led the National League in both runs scored with 116 and batting average, raking at a .344 clip. And the interesting trivia note about Hernandez's '79 season is that he was voted co-MVP with the great Willie Stargell, both garnering 64% of the vote share, the only co-MVPs in National League history. Though the voting here is a bit of a mystery, as Hernandez's numbers were superior pretty much all across the board except for in the home run category. But again, Stargell's Pirates won the pennant, while Hernandez's Cardinals finished 13 games behind. And the voting becomes even more of a mystery when you see the great numbers that Dave Winfield put up for the San Diego Padres that year. Number 9 is first baseman Jim Bottomley in 1928. Bottomley's excellent 28 season has unfortunately been a little bit lost to history among Cardinals fans as well, similar to Mort Cooper's season. The Hall of Famer is the first on our list here so far with an OPS over 1,000. So, any season with an OPS over 1,000, even for an MVP season, is pretty good. Bottomley also led the league in triples, home runs, RBIs, extra base hits, and total bases. At number 8, we finally get to a Stan Musial season, the first of his 3 MVPs in 1943. And in only his second full season in the majors, Stan the Man led the league in 10 categories: hits, doubles, triples, batting average, on-base percentage, slugging percentage, OPS, OPS+, total bases, and WAR. Enough said. Number 7, it's Musial again in 1946. Musial led the National League in only 9 categories in '46, and while he hit only 16 home runs, he did hit 20 triples, which is tied for the most among our candidates. And this was also Musial's only MVP season where first base was his primary position. Number 6 is Joe Ducky Medwick in 1937, and in my opinion, this is the most criminally underrated season on this list. Medwick was a 10-time All-Star and a Hall of Famer, and he's one of only 2 Cardinal MVPs to win the Triple Crown during his MVP season. But even the Triple Crown doesn't really tell how great Medwick's 1937 season was, as he led the league in runs, hits, doubles, homers, RBIs, batting average, slugging percentage, OPS, OPS+, and total bases. He also ranks second among our 18 with a ridiculous 97 extra base hits, and is one of only 2 players on the list to accumulate over 400 total bases. Just a monster season from Medwick here. And number 5, as we open up the top 5, we finally get to Albert Pujols with his 2005 season. The fact that the worst of Albert's 3 MVP seasons still makes the top 5 in our list is really a testament to truly how great Pujols was in a Cardinal uniform. Albert's 41 home runs in 2005 are the second most on our list, and his 129 runs scored and 97 walks are both good for third. And while this was the first MVP award of Albert's career, it could be argued by some that it should have already been his third, as he finished second place in 02 and in 03 behind Barry Bonds and his probably most definitely PED inflated numbers. Number 4, it's Albert again with his 2008 season, and in our rankings, his 08 and 05 seasons actually tied with 127 points, but I gave the nod to his 08 season here simply because his OPS plus and his WAR were both higher. His 104 walks are second most on our list, and his 1.114 OPS is third. And the interesting note on Pujols' 08 season is that he only received 82% of the vote share. This was due to Ryan Howard's humongous counting stats that year with 48 homers and 146 RBIs. But when you compare their slash lines, it's pretty clear I think the voters made the right choice going with Pujols, as his average on-base percentage and slugging percentage were each a full 100 points higher than Howard's. So now that we're into the top 3, I think it's worth noting that the top 3 are basically a toss-up here, receiving 147, 148, and 149 points in our rankings. So it's sort of a 1A, 1B, 1C situation. And let's also not forget that Gibson's legendary 1968 might also be a 1D. So in my opinion, it's from here on out, it's just kind of take your pick. So coming in at number 3 is baseball's perfect night, Stan the Man in 1948. Musial's 48 season leads all of our 18 candidates with his 135 runs scored, 11.3 WAR, and a ridiculous 103 extra base hits. His 376 batting average and 1.152 OPS are also good for second in our rankings. And probably the most eye-popping stat of Musial's 48 season was his OPS plus of 200. So for those of you not familiar with OPS plus, 100 is league average every year, so if you have a 110, you're 10% above league average. So this means Musial was essentially twice as good as a league average hitter. In short, Stan the Man flat out demolished baseballs in 1948. Number 2 is Rogers Hornsby in 1925, the first Cardinals MVP. Hornsby, perhaps one of the most forgotten true superstars in baseball history. He led the National League in OPS a whopping 11 times. So yes, there's a full 11 years of baseball history where Hornsby was essentially the best hitter in the National League. And in his 1925 season, he did collect the Triple Crown as well. Basically, all of his numbers in 1925 are insane, but the most eye-popping were his 1.245 OPS, his OPS plus of 210, which is the best on our list, and his 403 batting average, which was one of 3 times that Hornsby hit 400 in his career. Hats off to the Raja. And finally, the greatest MVP season in a Cardinal uniform, at least according to these rankings, is Albert the Machine Pujols in 2009. And while I've got to say I was even a bit surprised myself that Pujols edged out Hornsby and Musial here in our rankings, that's just the way it shook out. And it's really the all-around numbers that gives Pujols the slight edge here. His stolen bases, his walks, his defensive WAR, these are the things putting him ahead. And let's not forget, Pujols did win 2 Gold Gloves in his career, and so his .8 defensive WAR here ranks 5th on our list. A solid defensive season from Albert as well. So you may think Hornsby or Musial or Gibson's numbers are more impressive, and I would certainly have trouble arguing with you there, but this is really an example of what made Pujols a great player. He did everything well, he did a little bit of everything, and he just found a way to get the job done like a machine. So that wraps up our rankings of all 21 St. Louis Cardinals MVPs. Let us know maybe in the comments if you disagree with any of these, but I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.